Russia is the mother of corruption, and the closer you are to the epicenter, the more poisonous territory is. Many ex-Soviet republics suffer from corruption which they inherited from Moscow. But the stronger civil society you have, the faster the process of reforming moves. Ukraine is often described as a corrupt country, and I have to confess there are many problems. But at the same time, we have a very strong civil society and a great desire to change everything and to forget all our past mistakes, which were brought here together with the occupation by Soviet Union and Russian Empire. Soviet Union was intended to be the country of equals. But just on contrary, the number of its social servants and officials grew exponentially. And by 1950, it was 8 times larger than in Russian Empire, against the bureaucracy of which Bolsheviks promised to fight. The problem is also that many poorly educated, hungry people got access to power, and they were easily tempted by money or goods they had no access to previously. In 1930s and 50s, during the era of Stalin, corruption reached a new dimension. Terror, which led to the millions of victims, also gave millions of opportunities to those who were organizing arrests, imprisonments, and executions. They were trading an opportunity to survive, and many people were ready to pay money or to provide anything needed to be able to survive. A very common habit among NKVD agents was to dine at any flat they like. Can you imagine someone saying no to an NKVD agent when he or she asks for a soup? It is an example of small but still very widespread corruption. It had another dimension with goods and property of those people who were declared enemies of the state. Everything was divided between the representatives of the prison, police, or other secret services, or were sold. Citizens were very much afraid of various services, secret services, militia, KGB, and NKVD, and all the other agents. That's why they were ready to provide them with anything needed, just not to make them angry, not to come in close contact, and to avoid possible arrests. Another very unusual phenomenon of Soviet society were war trophies. After the Second World War, many Soviet soldiers returned back home with various expensive things, like silver, like furniture. I think they cannot be called trophies. Even fighting with your enemy, you can take away his weapons or something that symbolizes your military victory, but looting houses of civilians does not seem very honest. Something similar happens right now in Ukraine on temporarily occupied territories by Russian soldiers. And this division of goods that were stolen from the families was one of the favorite tasks of various Russian generals. In 50s and 60s, a new branch, if it's possible to say so, of corruption was discovered. Party elite started building houses, dachas, and other examples of private property, pretending that it is needed for the state. But later they fixed these flats and houses on their daughters, granddaughters, thus making them to some extent private, which goes against the rule of the equal communist society. Another example of corruption popular in that period was awarding each other with medals. And medals gave different money and other honors that you could actively use. So political leaders very often awarded each other with medals for the things they never did. By the way, in many ex-Soviet countries, this custom is still practiced. Deficit of product in late 70s and 80s led to the appearance of a new phenomenon known as blood. It is, by the way, still very active in Russian vocabulary. So what does it mean? Blood means acquaintances or connections you can use to achieve personal goals. or exchange of services that allow you access to resources and goods in context of total deficit. Total deficit led to the fact that professions like butcher or carrier of goods at a shop became extremely prestigious. Why? Because they were able to sell these goods from the backside of the shop. So people who work in trade became extremely influential, and corruption became a part of communist trade. For decades, corruption was the word never used in Soviet Union. But with Gorbachev's perestroika, it appeared in media. And perestroika was supposed to fight against corruption. The very idea of equal communist society failed. Karl Marx once said, "From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs." The collapse of Soviet Union led to the birth of oligarchy. And that is a serious disease of many post-Soviet countries. They spread their problems, they try to corrupt everything they touch, and we have to fight with them seriously. But they are the result of that gloomy years when Soviet Union collapsed and modern Russia was shaping. So who are these oligarchs? Not very smart people, stubborn, strong, and violent, who managed to occupy serious enterprises, factories, plants, institutions, and energy resources. And now, for decades, they control them and influence politics. Putin is actually one of these people. Sometimes we say that he is the richest person on a planet. Personally, I think he's the poorest person on the planet, but his resources help him to influence opinion a lot. Oligarchs spend much money to influence different political decisions all over the world. They spend that much money because on that decisions they receive even more money. And the recipe of such bribes they took once again from the Soviet Union. Soviet Union was the largest country in the world, but to some extent one of the poorest countries in the world. And instead of investing in its own development, it spent billions of money on the support of communist revolutions all over the world. Many countries belonged to the so-called zone of influence of the USSR and had to follow the rules which were set in the center, in the dark center of Moscow. Countries like Cuba, like Bulgaria, like Poland, like Czech Republic, like the Democratic Republic of Germany were much influenced by the political moods inside Kremlin. And much money was spent to finance representatives and politicians inside of these countries to make them polite and to make them follow the decisions that are needed for the communism. Of course, the communist regime, the socialist regime failed in these countries as it failed everywhere. But the traditions left. And today, Putin and people like him still have networks of agents, networks of friends, networks of oligarchs who can be influenced with the help of dirty and bloody Russian money. We have to be very careful with that, because by buying political decisions, they are also buying Ukrainian lives and buying the safety and security of the world. These are global crimes and global dangers that we have to be able to detect. That's why it is so important to debunk Soviet myths and to understand that many of the poisonous practices that were introduced back in that time are commonly used today by the people who come from the Soviet Union or by the people who carry that virus. Russia is the mother of corruption. Among many other demons, they came from this dying empire. We have to see that, we have to know that, we have to be able to identify the mechanisms with the help of which they can buy souls and decisions. But today the true face of Russia is visible. The true face of Soviet Union is becoming known to the world. And we have to be very careful not to let this dying empire come back. My name is Anna and I'm from Ukraine, and I promise you that here we will fight corruption.